Let's talk about parts margin. Parts margin is the difference between what you bought the part for and what you paid for it. So for instance, I might buy a part for $2 and sell it for 8. The difference is $6. And so if I take that 6 and I divide it by the 8, it would tell me that I have a 75% margin. So that's parts margin. And overall, the goal for most shops, and of course, if you're a shop owner, you can decide how you want to do it and what your goal should be. But here at the Institute, we recommend a 58% parts margin. And looking at numbers, which I do almost every single day for businesses, just this morning I had a shop that has a 61% parts margin that had a 42% parts margin a couple of months ago. So it can be done. In order to get parts margin, you need to have, there are 3 ways that this is done routinely in the industry. Number one is for someone to use manufacturer's suggested list. We don't recommend that because we don't think that manufacturer's suggested list has much to do with how you need to mark up parts and how you're going to get your margin. And in fact, when we come across shops that use manufacturer's suggested list, because of emotional discounting, which means that, I look at certain parts prices and go, oh my gosh, that's too high, and I bring them down. If you're using manufacturer suggested list, you're going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of the very low 40%, maybe the high 30s. And so if you look at a shop that says does $1 million in business a year, about half of that will be parts sales. And so that'll be 500,000. And if you're missing, let's say you're 38%, you should be 58. You're missing 20% on 500,000. It's going to cost you $100,000 this year in parts margin, money that you will not make. The second way that people usually do parts markup is to do 50%. And we find that you'll do 50% on say a $4 filter. You'll mark that up to $8 with no problem. And that is what that would be. That'll give you, that's 100% markup and a 50% margin. I doubled the price and got 50% is what my margin was. But you won't do that on a $4,000 motor or a $2,000 transmission. And if you don't double a $4,000 motor, if you only sell that for $4,800, $4,600, then your margin on that is extremely low, and you'd have to sell a lot of smaller parts at a much higher margin in order to make up for that. So if your methodology is to do 50%, you're probably, again, getting somewhere between about 38% and about 44% when everything is said and done. The best methodology for getting parts margin is to have a parts matrix. There'll be one in an example here. And if you look at the parts matrix, a part from 0 to say $2, I might mark up times 400%. So I might sell a $2 item at $8. And then as we go down, a $50 item, I might mark up times 2.5. So it would go out at 125. And then a $2,000 item, I might mark up by 40% or get a 40% margin. And a 40% margin on a $2,000 item would mean I sold it for about $2,800. And if you have a parts matrix and you program that into your point of sale and you follow that kind of a parts matrix and you make minor adjustments to it as time goes by, you can shoot for a 58% margin. And if you end up with 55, then that's a good parts margin. And you won't get an argument from me if I happen to be your coach or any of the coaches here at the Institute. If you're below 52%, that can get very, very costly. If you look at making a 48% margin when you should be at 58, and you're going to sell again $500,000 worth of parts this year, that's $50,000 in profit that you don't have. Now, it's really important to have a parts pricing scheme, how you do it, and to follow it. So our recommendation is to use a parts matrix. And there's an example here in this video.